I fought a gorilla and instantly regretted it. True scary story. The Olympic National Park isn't a place you just visit. It gets under your skin. The rain, the trees so tall they blot out the sun, the silence that's so thick you can almost taste it. Sarah, my wife, loved it. She was a wildlife biologist, and the park was her cathedral. Me, I was a park ranger. Used to be something else entirely. Used to be Ben the Hammer Harrison, amateur MMA champ, until a busted knee put me out of commission. Now I patrolled trails, rescued lost tourists, and tried not to dwell on the life I'd lost. The park was quiet most of the time. Peaceful. Except for the stories. Old Man Hemlock, a grizzled local who looked like he'd been carved from a redwood, was the main source of them. He lived in a cabin deep in the woods, rarely came into town, and spoke in riddles. He'd cornered me at the general store once, his eyes wild. "The forest remembers, Ranger," he rasped, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. "It remembers what we've forgotten. Things that ain't meant to be disturbed." He was talking about the Bigfoot sightings, the unexplained livestock deaths over by Lake Quinault, the whispers of something else in the woods. I'd laughed it off. Just local folklore, a way to keep the tourists spooked and buying souvenirs. Sarah wasn't so sure. There have been anomalies, she'd admitted one night, poring over trail camera footage, unusually large tracks. Scat that doesn't match any known animal in the area. It could be a bear, but... She trailed off, her brow furrowed. I shrugged. Could be anything. Mountain lion, even. People see what they want to see. I wanted to see something too, if I was honest. Something to break the monotony. Something to test myself against. The knee still ached sometimes, a phantom reminder of my former life. I missed the adrenaline, the raw physicality of the fight. I just missed feeling useful. The first incident that truly rattled me happened on the Quinault Loop Trail. I was checking for fallen trees when I heard it, a guttural roar unlike anything I'd ever heard. It vibrated in my chest, primal and terrifying. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a cougar. It was something else. I drew my sidearm, a Beretta 9mm, feeling a prickle of sweat on my forehead. The forest was silent except for the rustling of leaves. I scanned the trees, my senses on high alert. Nothing, just the lingering echo of that unholy sound. I radioed back to the station, reported what I'd heard. Ranger Davies, a lanky kid fresh out of college, chuckled. "Probably just a mating call, Harrison. Relax." I didn't relax. The reports started coming in more frequently. Hikers claimed to have seen shadows moving in the trees, heard branches snapping that sounded too heavy for deer. A family camping near Lake Cushman reported their food supplies had been ripped apart, the tent torn to shreds. No bear, no claw marks, just brute force. Sarah became increasingly worried. She started setting up more trail cameras, focusing on areas with the most activity. She even consulted with a primatologist from the University of Washington, who dismissed her concerns as highly improbable. "Improbable doesn't mean impossible," Sarah argued, her voice tight. "We need to take this seriously, Ben. Someone could get hurt." I knew she was right, but part of me was still excited. The hunter in me, long dormant, was starting to stir. I started carrying a hunting knife in addition to my sidearm. I started going out on patrol alone, venturing deeper into the woods, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever it was. Then came the day that changed everything. I was patrolling a seldom-used trail near the Hoh rainforest, the air thick with moisture and the scent of decay. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water from the trees. I felt a presence, a sense of being watched. I stopped, my hand instinctively going to the knife on my belt. That's when I saw it. It was massive, easily 7 feet tall, covered in thick, dark fur. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, its arms long and powerful. It looked angry. The eyes, deep-set and intelligent, burned with a cold, predatory rage. It was a gorilla, but not like any gorilla I'd ever seen in a zoo. This thing was different, wilder, more primal. It stood in the middle of the trail, blocking my path. I should have backed down. I should have radioed for backup. I should have done a lot of things differently, but I didn't. The adrenaline surged through me, flooding my senses. The old fighter instincts kicked in. I felt a rush of exhilaration. Fear, yes, but also a strange sense of anticipation. I drew my knife. "Okay, big guy," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Let's see what you got," I charged. It was the stupidest thing I've ever done. The gorilla roared, a sound that shook the very ground beneath my feet. It moved faster than I thought possible, closing the distance between us in an instant. I swung the knife, aiming for its chest, but it swatted my arm aside like I was a child. The force of the blow sent the knife flying into the undergrowth. Then it hit me. The impact was like being struck by a truck. I went flying backwards, landing hard on my back, the air knocked out of my lungs. I struggled to breathe, my vision blurring. The gorilla loomed over me, its massive frame blocking out the light. Its teeth, yellowed and sharp, were bared in a menacing snarl. I knew in that moment that I'd made a terrible mistake. This wasn't a fight, it was a slaughter. It grabbed me by the legs, lifting me off the ground like a rag doll. I screamed, a primal scream of terror. It slammed me against a tree, again and again. I felt bones crack, ribs shatter. The pain was excruciating, overwhelming. I managed to kick it in the face, connecting with a solid blow to its snout. It roared in pain and rage, dropping me to the ground. I tried to crawl away, but it was too late. It grabbed my arm, its grip like a vice. I felt the bones grind together, the tendons tear. I screamed again, a high-pitched, desperate sound. It was about to finish me off when something distracted it. A twig snapped in the distance. The gorilla turned its head, its eyes narrowing. It hesitated for a moment, then, to my utter disbelief, it released me and disappeared into the trees. I lay there, broken and bleeding, barely conscious. I don't know how long I was there. Time seemed to distort, to slow and speed up at random. Eventually, I managed to crawl back to the trail, dragging myself along the ground, inch by agonizing inch. It took me hours to reach the ranger station. Sarah was there when I finally stumbled through the door, covered in blood and dirt. Her face went white with shock. She rushed to my side, her hands trembling. "Ben, oh my God, Ben, what happened?" I tried to speak, but all that came out was a groan. "Gorilla," I managed to gasp, my voice hoarse. "Big gorilla." She didn't believe me, of course. No one did. They thought I'd been attacked by a bear, a particularly large and vicious bear. Deputy Miller, a man who prided himself on his pragmatism, shook his head. "Harrison, you're delirious. There are no gorillas in the Olympic National Park. It was a bear, a grizzly maybe." I tried to argue, to explain what I'd seen, what I'd felt. But my words were slurred, my thoughts jumbled. They gave me morphine, loaded me into an ambulance, and took me to the nearest hospital. While I was recovering, the incidents continued. More livestock deaths, more strange sightings. A group of hikers went missing near Mount Olympus. Their bodies were never found. Sarah became obsessed. She pored over the trail camera footage, analyzed the scat samples, interviewed the witnesses. She was convinced that I was telling the truth. "It's not a bear, Ben," she said one night, her eyes burning with intensity. "It's something else, something intelligent, something dangerous." I knew she was right. When I was finally released from the hospital, I was a changed man. My body was broken, my spirit shattered. The knee was worse than ever, useless. The doctors said I'd never fight again. But the worst part was the fear. The constant gnawing fear that gnawed at me, that followed me everywhere. The fear that the gorilla was still out there, watching, waiting. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't shake the image of those cold, predatory eyes. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit back and wait for it to strike again. I had to protect Sarah. I had to protect the park. Even if no one believed me. I started preparing. I stocked up on weapons, a high-powered rifle, a machete, a hunting bow. I studied the terrain, memorizing the trails, the ravines, the hidden valleys. I talked to Old Man Hemlock, hoping he could offer some insight. He just shook his head, his eyes filled with a sorrowful knowing. "The forest remembers, Ranger," he said again, "and sometimes what it remembers comes back to haunt us." I asked him if he knew anything about the gorilla. He didn't answer directly, but he did tell me a story. A story about a creature of the woods, a being of immense power and rage, a guardian of the ancient ways. He called it the Shadow Walker. I dismissed it as just another old wives' tale. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to the story. One night, a storm rolled in, unleashing its fury upon the park. The wind howled, the rain lashed down, and the thunder echoed through the mountains. It was the kind of night that made you feel small, insignificant. That's when the call came. Ranger Davies, his voice frantic, reported that the ranger station was under attack. Something was tearing through the walls, smashing windows, destroying everything in its path. "It's the gorilla, Harrison," he screamed into the radio. "It's here. It's killing everyone." Then, silence. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my rifle, kissed Sarah goodbye, and raced out into the storm. She begged me to stay, to call for help, but I couldn't. I knew that if I didn't do something, everyone I cared about would die. I drove as fast as I could, the wipers struggling to keep up with the rain. When I reached the ranger station, it was a scene of utter devastation. The building was in ruins, the windows shattered, the walls torn apart. There were bodies everywhere. Ranger Davies, his face frozen in a mask of terror, lay dead in the parking lot. The gorilla was gone. I followed its tracks into the woods, my heart pounding in my chest. The storm raged around me, making it difficult to see, to hear. But I pressed on, driven by a desperate need for revenge. I tracked it for hours, deeper and deeper into the forest. I knew I was being reckless, that I was walking into a trap. But I didn't care. I was beyond reason, beyond fear. Finally, I found it. It was standing in a clearing, silhouetted against the storm-racked sky. It was even bigger than I remembered, more menacing, more inhuman. I raised my rifle, took aim, and fired. The bullet struck it in the chest, but it barely flinched. It roared, a sound that shook the very foundations of the earth. It turned and charged, its eyes burning with rage. I fired again and again, emptying the magazine. The bullets seemed to have little effect. The gorilla kept coming, its massive frame looming closer and closer. I knew I was outmatched, but I wasn't ready to give up. I dropped the rifle, drew my machete, and charged towards it. The battle was brutal, desperate. The gorilla was too strong, too fast. It swatted my machete aside, tearing at me with its claws. I dodged, ducked, and weaved, trying to stay alive. I managed to land a few blows, cutting into its flesh, but it didn't seem to notice. It grabbed me, lifting me off the ground. I felt its hot breath on my face, its teeth bared in a snarl. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. But then something unexpected happened. Sarah appeared, out of nowhere. She had followed me into the woods, armed with a tranquilizer gun she had taken from her lab. She fired a dart into the gorilla's neck. The gorilla roared, staggered, and then collapsed to the ground. I stared at Sarah, dumbfounded. She rushed to my side, her face etched with concern. "Ben, are you okay?" I nodded, unable to speak. We waited for Deputy Miller and his men to arrive. They were shocked by what they saw. The carnage at the ranger station, the massive gorilla lying unconscious in the clearing. They finally believed me. They loaded the gorilla onto a truck and took it away. I never saw it again. I spent months recovering from my injuries. The doctors said I was lucky to be alive, but I didn't feel lucky. I felt haunted. They never determined where the gorilla came from. Some said it was an escaped zoo animal. Others said it was a genetic experiment gone wrong. Still others whispered about the Shadow Walker, the guardian of the woods. Sarah continued her research, but she never found any definitive answers. The trail camera footage was inconclusive. The scat samples were strange. They contained traces of DNA that didn't match any known primate. The official explanation was that it was a rogue gorilla, a freak of nature. But I knew better. I knew that something else was going on. Something ancient, something unnatural. Months later, I was sitting on the porch of our cabin watching the sunset over the Olympic Mountains. Sarah was inside, working in her lab. The park was quiet, peaceful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I heard a rustling in the trees, a branch snapping in the distance. I stood up, my hand instinctively going to the knife on my belt. Then I heard it. A roar, a guttural, primal roar that vibrated in my chest, that echoed through the mountains. The same roar I'd heard in the woods, the day I first encountered the gorilla. I stared out into the trees, my heart pounding in my chest. It was still out there, waiting, watching. The forest remembers, and it never forgets. Was it truly just a gorilla, or was it something more? Something else. I guess I will always be left wondering.